The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Seeker After Truth by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Part 3. Sufi Stories. Rich and Poor. The great lawgiver Moses was on his way to see God, to ask for guidance about his future work. On the way he met a mendicant who said, "Where are you going, Moses?" Said the prophet, "I am on my way to see God." "When you see him, will you say that I am poor and that I do not know what to do to improve my condition?" Moses undertook to ask. Presently he came upon a very rich man who asked, "Where are you going, Moses?" "To see God." "When you do, will you ask him what I am to do? I have too much money, and still he showers it upon me." Moses agreed to ask. Eventually Moses met God and said, "Lord, I have come to ask how I should carry on the work, and I have to ask for advice about two men whom I met on the way." He told God about the rich man and the poor man. God said, "O Moses, you ask me to tell you how to continue with your work. But in the cases of the rich and the poor men, you did not do what you already knew was equitable, giving to the poor one the excess of the rich one. How can I tell you to do more, when you do not do what you are supposed to be doing already?" Played upon. Generosity of mind, which is so often represented as a virtue, is in one sense the highest form of selfishness, in the sense, that is, that it enables people to reach heights denied to the miserly and small-minded. Fear of loss and exulting at gain are methods of emotional stimulus which both provide temporary excitement, which people crave, and stand in the way of deeper understanding. Most people are played upon by others, by their own ideas, by the environment, to such an extent that they are often unaware that there is any range of experience which is separable from these superficialities. The Persian poet Li Wai has illustrated this in his rendering of a traditional tale which is both enjoyable and instructive. There was once a rich man sitting by the wayside to picnic on his way home from a long journey. He was enjoying his food, thinking of his profits, and contemplating with pleasure the moment when he would reach his house. As he ate, a traveller came from the opposite direction. The merchant saluted him and asked how things were in his town. "All is well." "Do you know my house? How are my wife and son?" "Yes, your son is well and his mother is flourishing." "What of my camel?" "Contented and healthy." "And is my dog on guard?" "As always, faithful and awaiting you." Now, with the last possible anxiety lifted from his mind, the merchant began to eat with renewed appetite. He offered nothing to the other traveller, who thought he might teach him a lesson. A gazelle ran past, and the traveller sighed deeply. "What is the matter?" asked the merchant. "I was just thinking that had your dog not died, it would have been able to outpace that gazelle." "My dog dead? How did it happen?" "He ate too much of the meat of your camel." "My prize camel dead too? How did that happen?" "It was killed to provide the meal at the funeral of your wife." "My wife? How can she be dead?" "She died of grief when your son died." My son! What happened to him? He did not survive the collapse of your house." At this the merchant rose, tore his robes to shreds, and ran screaming into the wilderness. If the merchant had given the traveller some of his picnic, he might not have had to go through such a harrowing experience as to hear all those false reports. On the other hand, as it has been remarked, unless he had been stingy, he would not have had the opportunity of seeing his own behaviour when faced with the traveller's news. But if he had not been stingy, would he have needed the shock treatment, which gave him the chance to observe himself? The Dervish and his Wish. When human beings are having their characteristics given out to them, one of the angels came to a man who was to be a dervish and asked, "What do you want?" The dervish-to-be answered, "Nothing," and continued to sit in contemplation of truth. Now the angel went from one to another of the humans-to-be and asked their wishes. The king-to-be said, "Pomp and importance." The peasant-to-be said, "Work to do." The warrior-to-be said, "Glory." And so it went on. Then a voice said to the dervish-to-be, "You have asked nothing for yourself, and it is not too late to choose. Because of your desire for truth, however, you shall have a glimpse of how humanity will use the attributes." As the dervish-to-be looked into a mirror that was held before him, he saw kings in their pomp and ceremony, peasants working endlessly, soldiers continually fighting. Then the dervish-to-be gasped, "But what will be the future of the people of learning?" The picture in the mirror shifted, and he saw priests and scholars and experts of all kinds. They had asked for opinions, and for convictions, and for learning. As a result, of course, they were often led astray, and they led others just as far away from truth. The dervish-to-be cried out, "But why is there no way of seeking knowledge without opinion, truth without obsession, fact without personal attachment to it?" "It is somewhat too late for those things to be given to the existing types," said the angel, "and therefore people will now regard facts as knowledge, opinion as enlightenment, commitment as piety and worth." "But," said the dervish-to-be, "how will people come to know that truth is not opinion, that facts are not knowledge, that belief is not worth?" "Because," said the angel, "when opinion is taken as fact, it does not fit properly. When facts are believed to be knowledge, there is an irregularity in the person who tries to integrate this into himself. When obsession is confused with duty, again it leaves a space." "And then what happens?" asked the dervish-to-be. "And then the people who try to fit the one into the place of the other become vain, get angry, are seen to be petty, and people observing them will start to look instead for real knowledge." The dervish-to-be asked, "But will anything stop people from seeing the shortcomings of the specialists?" "Only," said the angel, "if there is too much vanity, emotion, and pettiness on the part of the observer." Do as your friends wish. A certain Sufi was visiting the city of Samarkand, whose ruler claimed, "There is no sense or reality in the Sufi allegation of truth beyond appearances. One thing which is, however, true is that people become friends, and friends do as their friends wish." "Would your Highness care to name 3 of your friends?" the Sufi asked. "Certainly. There is Judge Afifi, Kabil the hunter, and Salim the Sultan of the merchants." "I can prove that friends do not do what friends want," said the Sufi, "but you will have to give me 3 weeks." "3 weeks, but if you do not succeed, your head will roll," answered the Khan. 3 weeks later, the Sufi called the Khan into a room. 3 men sat there, Afifi the judge, the hunter Kabil, and Salim the merchant. "Here," said the sage, "is the real situation, contrary to your imaginings. Afifi has sworn to kill Salim, and Salim wants to destroy Afifi. Which one has your support? Both? How can you do as your friends wish?" "And Kabil?" asked the Khan. "Kabil wants to kill you. No doubt, as a good friend, you will help him." Hypocrite. Anwar Abbasi relates, "I saw a god-intoxicated dervish sitting by the roadside, covered only with a tattered blanket. A charitable man, a rich merchant, also seeing him, hurried to his shop and brought back a valuable cashmere shawl. This he placed gently upon the dervish as he slept, hoping for merit and happy to be of service to the servants of the divine. As I watched, a number of soldiers of the king approached along the highway, in earnest conversation with a scholar whom they had met on the way. They saw the sleeping dervish. The scholar gesticulated, and the soldiers started to belabor the poor man. They tore the garment from his shoulders and threw it into the nearby stream. He, for his part, made no complaint, and I approached him to see what he had to say. "My friend," he said, "do not blame the people of the world if they see a dervish clad in precious robes and fall upon him with imprecations. If they were not typical, there would be no dervishes, shawls, scholars, or soldiers in the world." The Monster. There is a story of old, once told by a people who hearkened to wisdom. As the members of that community do not now listen to meanings, it really matters little whether they are told the story or not, or have preserved it or not. But to proceed, the story concerns 4 men who lived in the same neighborhood and had all studied the theoretical and practical arts to such an extent, and under the greatest masters of knowledge, that everyone was convinced that they had reached the apogee of knowledge. It so happened that the 4 came to the conclusion that they should travel and exercise their knowledge, for has it not been said that he who has knowledge and does not use it, it is as if he were a fool? In short, the friends became wayfarers, seeking opportunities to act upon their knowledge. It also happens to be true, as has been known both before and since, that 3 of the scholars were deeply versed in arts and sciences, in theory and practice, while the 4th, while less celebrated in customary terms, was well endowed with understanding. After some days, during which they came to know one another more, and when they had had many debates and discussions, the 3 well-matched scholars felt that their companion was nothing like as well endowed with learning as they, and they tried to make him leave their party to return home. When he refused to do so, they said, "It is typical of an insensitive one like you, bereft of appreciation of the great capacities which we others have, to persist in representing yourself as our equal." But they allowed him to accompany them, although they excluded him thenceforth from their important deliberations. Now it so happened that one day while the 4 were walking along, they came upon a heap of bones and other remains of an animal by the roadside. "Ah," said the first scholar, "I can perceive through my knowledge that this is the carcass of a lion." "And I," said the second scholar, "have the knowledge to reconstitute its body in a viable form." "As for me," said the third scholar, "I have the capacity to reanimate things, and I can bestow life upon it." They decided to apply their respective powers in these ways. The 4th scholar, however, caught the others by the sleeve and said, "I must inform you that although you object to my skills and theoretical abilities, I am yet a man of understanding. This is, indeed, as you have perceived, the remains of a lion. Bring it back to life, and it will destroy us all if it can." But the other 3 scholars were far too interested in exercising their theories and getting on with their practices. Within a few minutes, the mound of skin and bone was reconstituted into a living, breathing, clearly very dangerous lion. While the practitioners of learning were busy with their operations, the 4th scholar climbed a tall tree. As he watched, the lion fell on his companions and devoured them. Then it roared away into the wilderness, and the only survivor of the expedition came down from his tree and made his way back to his country. Asleep and awake. Once upon a time in old Baghdad, there lived a man named Hassan, who was for long contented enough with his lot. He lived a harmonious life, attending to his affairs and looking after his small shop, which his old mother helped him to run. But as time passed, he became uncertain as to the drift and direction of his life. Is there not more, he asked himself, and wondered, especially when sitting in contemplation in the evenings, whether he might not experience more and achieve what was possible to him. Because he gave voice to these thoughts, certain men of religion in his locality were pleased to brand him as a free thinker and malcontent, saying, "Dissatisfaction is another word for ingratitude, and aspiration is a veiled term for greed. Surely Hassan should be denounced by all right-thinking men." People listened to the narrow-minded clerics, and were annoyed by Hassan's questionings, and presently he could find few who would bear his company for very long. Even those who had listened to his ideas were confused by them, and Hassan regarded them as shallow people in any case. So Hassan took to wandering away from his shop and sitting, towards evening, at the crossroads at the end of his street, to ponder his desires and to think over the hostility of the supposed wise men. One day it happened that the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, commander of the faithful, was on his nightly rounds in disguise, accompanied by his faithful minister Jafar and his black executioner, the eunuch Masrur, when they came upon the huddled figure at the crossroads. "There must be something of interest to us in this man," said the Caliph to his companions. To Hassan he said, "May we spend some time talking with you, as we are travellers who have completed our work in this city and are without friends?" "Willingly," said Hassan, "and as you are strangers, you shall come back to my house, where I can entertain you better than at a crossroads." The 4 made their way back to Hassan's house, which he had equipped quite luxuriously for the entertainment of guests, though he hardly ever had any, and passed a pleasant evening. "Friend Hassan," said the disguised Caliph, "now that we are so well acquainted, tell us something of your desires and of your likes and dislikes to while away the time." "Honourable sir and kindly traveller," said Hassan, "I am really a rather simple man. But it is true that I would like one thing, and I dislike one thing. I would like to be commander of the faithful, the Caliph himself, and I dislike above all the contemptuous and small-minded self-styled men of religion who make it their business to harass all those who are not as hypocritical as themselves." When an opportunity presented itself, the Caliph slipped a dose of powerful narcotic into Hassan's drink. Within a few moments he was unconscious, and the powerful Masrur carried him back to the palace. When he came to himself, Hassan found that he was dressed in imperial garments, lying on a silken couch in the palace of the Caliph, with minions massaging his hands and feet. "Where am I?" he cried. "In your palace, O commander of the believers," chorused the attendants, for this is what they had been ordered to do by Harun himself. At first he could not believe that he could possibly be the Caliph, and Hassan bit his finger to see whether he was still asleep. Then he thought that he must have been bewitched by some genie, some king of the genies at least. But little by little, as his orders were carried out and everyone behaved towards him with the very greatest respect, he became convinced that he was, indeed, Harun al-Rashid. He gave orders that the corrupt self-styled divines were to be thrashed, that all the pay of the soldiers was to be doubled, that everyone should be exempted from military service, that the river Tigris was to be dammed, that people who wanted to leave the city should be prevented, and those who wanted to come in should be stopped. In fact, such was the effect of his surroundings and the lack of any directing instinct upon him that, had his orders been carried out, the good order of the realm would have been seriously undermined. The political advisers suggested that he should make alliances. The military commanders requested that he prepare for war. The merchants sent delegations pressing for higher prices. The citizenry petitioned for more liberal administration. The wise men counselled caution and this and that action. Hassan listened to all of them, and was influenced now by one and now by another. And all this happened within the space of a single day, between his waking up in the early morning following the soporific draught and the evening of the same day. All the time, the Caliph and Jafar and Masrur watched their unwitting guest from a place of concealment which had been specially built for the purpose. Finally, Harun called his friends together and said, "This is not the man whom we seek, one who will respond to the opportunities and also the difficulties of power in such a way as to make the most of human life, discharging obligations and carrying on enterprises for the good of all, including himself. Release him." So Hassan was again drugged, dressed in his old clothes, and taken to the crossroads near his home, where he woke up some time later shouting, "I am the Caliph, and demand that you obey me." When he was thoroughly awake, however, he was quite sure that it had all been a dream. From time to time after that, he used to think that that had been quite the most amazing sort of dream, that he had indeed lived in another reality. But he was never able to return to it. The Greater World. There was once a man who became tired of his life in his village. The more he heard, from travellers passing through the nearby market town, of the greater world, the more he longed to enter it, and to escape from the limitations which he felt surrounded him at every turn. Finally he made his decision, and set off down the road which led away from his village, seeking the greater world. Soon he found himself upon a highway with one other traveller on it. They talked, and our friend formed the impression that his companion knew a great deal about this greater world. So, when he was invited, he agreed to accompany the other man, whom we will call the sage, on his way. When they had been walking for some time, the sage said, "What is that thing by the side of the road, and what could one do about it?" The traveller looked and saw that it was a swarm of bees which was attached to a tree trunk. He said, "It is a bee swarm. I think I'll take it with me. I might be able to sell it." So he took off his coat and, using it as a makeshift sack, collected most of the bees and slung the coat over his shoulder. Now some of the bees crawled out of the coat and buzzed about angrily for a time. Then they stung the traveller in the hand. He hopped about in agony and dropped his bundle. Then, picking up the coat, he dashed it against a rock until all the bees had been detached from it. The sage said, "Let us sit down here and think about this. What have you been doing?" "Some of the bees stung me, and so I reacted normally." "Is it normal to punish all the bees for what some of them did?" "You know that anyone would have behaved like that," said the other man, thinking how tedious these philosophers are. "But what do the bees think?" asked the sage. He made a mysterious signal, and the traveller saw that there were 3 or 4 bees on the ground near where they sat. Through the power of the sage's signal, he supposed, he could understand what they were saying to one another. One of the bees said to one of the others, "Master, as the wise bee of the age, perhaps you can explain to us what has just happened." The wise bee answered, "Yes, indeed. Some beings from the greater world came along and decided to capture us. Some of us stung them as a reflex action, and one of them then dashed the lot of us onto a rock in fury." One of the others asked him, "Do they always behave like that?" "They always behave like that under similar circumstances," said the wise bee. "But it is because so many members of our swarm wanted to get into the greater world without knowing anything about it that we were seized in the first place." Another of the bees said, "Well, if the greater world is like that, I for one want to give up my search for it and no longer consider myself a member of your school, however wise you may be." "And you," said the sage, turning to his companion, "like the bees, have been trying to enter the greater world, but as soon as you start on the road, you do something which you regret." The Lost Jewel. There was once a man who lost his most precious possession, a jewel of inestimable worth. He had been deeply attached to this gem, and was determined to find it if there was any way that this could be done in this life. Making enquiries everywhere, he was led in all directions by soothsayers and false prophets, by astrologers and palmists, by mendicants and magicians. After a long time, when he had still not given up hope, someone suggested that he should ask a certain Sufi, who was reputed to be able to work miracles. When he had explained his trouble to the Sufi, the wise man said, "I will resolve your problem, providing that you will do something for me." "I shall do anything," said the excited man. "Very well," said the Sufi. "Go and find me, and bring him here, a man who has never lost anything." The man asked everyone in his village, then in the nearby town, then in the country, and then he travelled from country to country asking for a man who had never lost anything. Wherever he went, of course, people not only said that they had lost things, but insisted, more often than not, when reminded of their loss, in telling him what they had lost and how much it grieved them. Finally, he felt that he had heard of so much pain and loss that he really cared very little for his own trouble. But by now he had become obsessed with finding someone who had had no loss. After years of this searching, he heard that there was indeed such a man, and he managed to reach him in an inaccessible cave in a mountain. "Have you ever lost anything?" he asked. "Never," said the recluse. "How is that?" "Because I never had anything." "Then you must come with me, because I have been told by such and such an eminent Sufi master that I must bring you to him." The sage drew a deep breath and sighed. "What was your problem?" he asked. "To get back my jewel." "And did you get it?" "No, I met so many people over the years who had lost things and suffered that I no longer want the gem back." "Then what do you want?" "To take you back to the Sufi." "Why should that matter to you?" Now the man could not think why, when his problem was solved, what the Sufi had asked should matter any more. "Furthermore," said the hermit, "what makes the Sufi think that I will want to go back with you to him?" "That's right," said the other man. "That proves that the Sufi did not know what he was talking about." "Are you worrying about taking me back to the Sufi now?" asked the hermit. "Not at all." "Then was the Sufi not wise, having engineered this whole series of experiences? No, said the man. If anyone, I was wise, for it was I who started to look for my gem. And, of course, he never became wise, but he had not wanted to in the first place. The Magician's Dinner. There was once a magician who built a house near a large and prosperous village. One day he invited all the people of the village to dinner. "Before we eat," he said, "we have some entertainments." Everyone was pleased, and the magician provided a first-class conjuring show, with rabbits coming out of hats, flags appearing from nowhere, and one thing turning into another. The people were delighted. Then the magician asked, "Would you like dinner now, or more entertainments?" Everyone called for entertainments, for they had never seen anything like it before. At home there was food, but never such excitement as this. So the magician changed himself into a pigeon, then into a hawk, and finally into a dragon. The people went wild with excitement. He asked them again, and they wanted more, and they got it. Then he asked them if they wanted to eat, and they said that they did. So the magician made them feel that they were eating, diverting their attention with a number of tricks through his magical powers. The imaginary eating and entertainments went on all night. When it was dawn, some of the people said, "We must go to work." So the magician made those people imagine that they went home, got ready for work, and actually did a day's work. In short, whenever anyone said that he had to do something, the magician made him think first that he was going to do it, then that he had done it, and finally that he had come back to the magician's house. Finally, the magician had woven such spells over the people of the village that they worked only for him, while they thought that they were carrying on with their ordinary lives. Whenever they felt a little restless, he made them think that they were back at dinner at his house, and this gave them pleasure and made them forget. And what happened to the magician and the people in the end? Do you know? I cannot tell you, because he is still busily doing it, and the people are still largely under his spell. The Astrologers. There was once a king who had succeeded to the throne and decided that he should now be crowned. When the question of the date was being discussed at court, the astrologers stepped forward and said, "The date must be fixed only after the horoscope for the event has been cast. When an event takes place without a horoscope, it may be unlucky." "Very well," said the king. Then a Sufi stood up. "Your Majesty," he said, "according to that doctrine, surely a horoscope must first be cast for the moment at which the coronation's own horoscope is to be cast. Otherwise, perhaps the astrologers might do their work at an unlucky moment." "Is that true?" the king asked the astrologers. "Yes, it might be true," they admitted. "But," said the Sufi, "what about the horoscope of the coronation? How is that to be done?" Since, after considerable wrangling, nobody could answer that question, the astrologers decided to change the rules so that they could get on with their work. And so the king did get crowned in the end. In the Desert. Handed down from remote times is a story of the man of the desert and his quest, which was carried into the towns and villages and has led to Sufi understanding, even when it is related in conditions very different from those in which it is said to have originated. It is the tale of the Saint and the Hawk. A desert huntsman came upon a contemplative, sitting in the sandy waste, with his hand on his staff and his arm around a wild-looking hawk, which nestled close to him. The hunter said, "How can it be that a man such as you, dedicated to matters of the world beyond, can hold such a thing as a predator and a trivial thing like a bird of any account?" The wise man answered, "Answer me one question, and your answer shall be the same as my answer. How is it that you can carry at your side such a killing knife as you have there, when you must have concern for your fellow creature?" The hunter said, "This knife is here to defend myself against the wickedness of desert lions, which have more than once leapt upon me from a thicket, and only through its instrumentality have I been able to survive and to live until this moment so that I can answer your question." The saint told him, "If I spent all my time in contemplation and none in comforting God's creatures, or if you sought desert lions to kill, you might think me a saint, though I would become incapable of anything else, so that the higher impulses would not reach me. And if you hunted lions from morning to night, people would call you a brave hunter, though this dedication would render you incapable of anything else. You, on your part, would become unable to experience things of the world. I would become incapable of experiencing the other world." This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.